Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of the live event series on inclusion and diversity in geoprofession. I'm your host, Menzer Pehlivan. I'm a geotechnical engineer specialized in geotechnical earthquake engineering. I work with Jacobs, based in Seattle, Washington, in the United States. I am the Northwest Tunnel and Ground Engineering Group Leader and also the Executive Advisor to the Global Solutions and Technology Director here at Jacobs. In addition, at Jacobs, I am the global co-chair of One World Employee Network that focuses on cultural inclusion and diversity with a goal of enhancing cultural intelligence of our members and of everyone in our company and helping them become global citizens. Inclusion and diversity is very dear to my heart. I am the founding chair and the immediate past president of the ASCE Geo-Institute Outreach and Engagement Committee. Also, I wanted to put a plug in, if you haven't checked it out yet, November-December edition of the GeoStrata is on inclusion and diversity in geotech. I have had the opportunity to share an opinion piece on inclusion and diversity in our business through the lens of cultural and generational diversity and inclusion. If you get the chance to read it, please share your thoughts. With no further ado, today I'm very excited to have Dr. Suzanne Lacasse as my guest to talk about inclusion and diversity in geoprofession. She absolutely needs no introduction to many of us. She is a geolegend to start with, but Suzanne's career is so amazing I actually want to take time to share her bio with you because I'm totally blown away by it, and I'm pretty sure you will be too. Dr. Suzanne Lacasse was born in Quebec, Canada, and she did her Bachelor of Arts at the University of Ottawa, her Bachelor of Civil Engineering at École Polytechnique Montréal, and her graduate studies at MIT. After 15 years on MIT's Faculty of Civil and Environmental Engineering, she moved to NGI, Norwegian Geotechnical Institute, in Oslo, Norway, and she became Managing Director of NGI in 1991. A position she held until 2011. She gave the 37th Terzaghi Lecture in 2001, and she is the first woman to give the Terzaghi Lecture, talking about breaking glass ceilings here, and the 55th Rankin Lecture in 2015, the 8th International Society of Soil Mechanics and Geotechnical Engineering Terzaghi Oration in 2013, and the 9th Coulomb Lecture in 2011. In addition to these, she has given keynote lectures in over 40 countries and authored over 320 papers. Dr. Lacasse received her PhD honoris causa from University of Dundee, the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, and the University du Quebec. She is an elected member of National Academy of Engineers in the States, Canada, Norway, and France. In addition to that, she is member of the Royal Society of Canada, the Royal Academy of Norway, and Academy of Sciences and Letters in Norway. She is an honorary professor at Tongji University in Shanghai, Zhejiang University in Hangzhou, and Shanghai Jiutong University. I probably butchered the pronunciations of those, but please, my apologies. In addition to that, she is the chair of Slope Safety Technical Review Board in Hong Kong. She is the officer of the Order of Canada and the Knight of the First Falcon Order in Iceland. I told you that this was very impressive, and that's why I really wanted to share. With no further ado, Suzanne, thank you for agreeing to join the Inclusion and Diversity Live series with me. I'm more than honored to have you here today. Welcome. I usually start with the same question with all my guests. So keeping the tradition, let's start with that question. What does inclusion and diversity mean to you?
I guess inclusion diversity is a state of mind. And as a matter of fact, I don't find that the gender aspect is the most crucial aspect of diversity and inclusions. I find there are more problems or challenges for including, for example, immigrants and non-immigrants and racial aspects than there are on the gender side. And it's because I guess I was very lucky. I have not experienced too many, which probably we will go into in later the conversation. But, I have honestly never felt discriminated against. And I've been working for 50 years.
That is so true. But talking about that, I do know a little bit about the story. Can you share with us how you decided to become a geotechnical engineer?
Well, I come from a very small mining town up north in Quebec, and mining was our livelihood. So I wanted to be a mining engineer. And the first part of the story is my father was an engineer also, but he was always encouraging me, but he did not find or believe I had the health or the stamina or whatever to be an engineer with all those men. So he said, I will not oppose you doing a career in engineering, but first do something a bit more feminine. So he directed me to do this Bachelor of Literature and Philosophy at University of Ottawa, which turned out to be a great advantage because, it provides you with a baggage which is a bit different than just engineering. And I have been happy with that. So that was the first part. And, my father's technique, it nearly worked. I enjoyed the arts very much. So I nearly decided to do a doctor's degree in that instead. But I was curious about engineering. And this was the 60s, early 60s, and the world was not ready to having a female mining engineer. Being a female and going down underground in the mine was thought to bring bad luck. And there had been some occasions where there had been a fire after Queen Elizabeth had visited the mine. So I said, okay. So when I went to École Polytechnique, and when you're in the third year, you decide which specialty you want to have. And, there was this, I had one course in geotechnical engineering, and I thought it was just so fascinating, the way it was a combination of not just hard science. There was a lot of judgment or making decisions on which method to use. So I opted for geotechnical engineering. And I must say, it was a coincidence that it happened that way, but I have never regretted that choice all my life. I've been happy in geotechnical engineering for all these 50 years.
That is awesome. That's a wonderful story, and I knew a little bit about it, so that's why I wanted to give you the opportunity to share it to you. So you talked in the answers of the first two questions, you talked a little bit about like the different parts of the inclusion and diversity that might be of interest. I'm very interested in the cultural inclusion and diversity, and I think that really affects the way that we interact with each other, the way that we conduct business. And if we do not necessarily understand the differences and the similarities with the culture, it's all the interactions that we have is very open to misunderstandings, misconceptions. And you, to start with, have worked in so many different geographies with many different cultures. Can you talk a little bit about how that comes into play, and like, have you had any experience where that cultural inclusion or cultural diversity played a key role? What are your thoughts on that?
Before I answer, can I tell you a little anecdote? Not to complain or anything, but when I graduated as an engineer at École Polytechnique, I applied for a job with a company doing some dam work. And my reason was I wanted to go back home and work on the dams in James Bay. And the poor gentleman, it's not his fault, but it was the day, the time, the atmosphere. Then he said, naturally, you being a woman, you will stay in the offices, the main offices in Montreal and Quebec. The reason I had applied was to go out in the field. And that turned out to be very good, because I had not thought at that time of doing graduate work. And but I knew I was accepted at MIT, so I decided to go do graduate work. Not just more or less, you're 18 or 20 years old. You make a decision without very good reasons. And I think having been at MIT, that has been very determining for my career. So, but okay, now roll forward 10 years, no, 12 years. And I come to NGI, I was a postdoc, so I was still fairly young. I was 30 or so. And so they needed to have an engineer to work on a dam up north in the snow. And I could hardly speak Norwegian, and you can realize that the men doing compaction on the dam speak essentially Norwegian. There was no hesitation. They sent me there. I got my dream fulfilled within the first few months. And it worked fine. I mean, we managed to understand each other with my bad Norwegian and his bad English. And the thing was compacted the way it was supposed to be. So I think it was a span of 10 or 12 years, but already in that time, and Norway is very positive to women in let's say, career which have been traditionally associated with the male gender. But there was such a difference in the span of 10 or 15 years, and I thought that was just marvelous. And, I was so happy to be working in a dam in the snow, exactly what I had wished when I came out with my bachelor. But yes, there are, it's not that there are differences. I mean, the experience I told you about, that's 40 or 50 years ago. And things, and in my civil engineering class, there was one girl. With everybody else was men, and in the class above me there were one or two girls, but both of them got married and stayed at home. That was the way things were done then. So I find that the aspect of diversity and the approach to welcoming women into civil engineering and geotechnical engineering in Canada and Norway are very similar. And we see so many more women, very good women, in the careers at civil engineering or geotechnical engineering. I think this has come a long way. In the United States, I have not worked there since about worked permanently since in the 90s. But there, they were also very open to a woman working in civil engineering, but they were maybe a bit more careful in how people would express oneself, or they were more conscious that there could be a problem, and that never disturbed me per se. But it was slightly maybe a bit more restrained attitude. But with respect to inclusion and possible discrimination, I am of the strong belief that at the base there is not such. I have never felt discriminated. But I have seen situations, or have been in situations, where it's possible to interpret a remark or something someone has said in the worst possible way, so that it would create a problem, and that disappoints me. I see examples even today. It's okay to be teased. It's okay that somebody makes a joke that, oh, so you're all dressed up and you're going in the field. It's fine that, but I think it's important to have such a kind of relaxed attitude to the fact that we are physically different, but intellectually we are not. And so if we're able to laugh at each other's jokes, because I have seen, it never happened to me, but I have seen cases where some women were at a disadvantage because they immediately reacted negatively to some remark which was more of a pun or more of a amusing remark or such.
Susan, I
But
think we have a common history together on that, right? Like from one of the conferences that we've attended together.
yeah, but it's I think it has to do with upbringing, because when I was a child, I had the brothers that were older than me, and there was never a difference with being a girl or a boy at home. We did the same things, and we were all going to study at university, and then we were bad together and we were good together and all that. And I think if one thing, it's not so much the civil engineering can do something, but it has a lot to do with the parents, the way they bring up the children. If they make a difference when they're children, then they will see a difference when they're older.
That is so true. That is so true. So I know, like, the next two questions, it's like moving a little bit maybe apart from that gender portion. So when you switch from, like, the Canada to the US, then to Norway, did you realize any, like, kind of the way that because different cultures form maybe trust with each other differently, so and then they communicate differently. There are some of the cultures are just like the communication is very open, the other ones it is very layered. Have you had to adjust the way that you are working with different groups as you moved from like these different geographies, different cultures?
Yeah, there is some of that, and that's why I think the cultural difference are more important today than the gender differences. Well, Canada to United States, and my mother was Irish, so the language was not a problem. So that was not much of a cultural change. It was getting the Americans are a bit more talk more freely and big voices and things. So there was this kind of adjustment, but that was not a problem. But the American culture is very, very, very welcoming. You meet somebody one day, and then you're invited to dinner at his home the next day. But when you arrive to Norway, it's not like that. And the first 6 months, I did not get invited anywhere. And coming from 15 years in the States where I had outings nearly every day, all of a sudden I said, what am I doing here? I mean, I don't have any friends. I don't, the type of friends I had in the United States. And it's a different culture. The Norwegian is much more reserved. He will take a long time to kind of examine you and make sure that you're a real friend. And then you might be invited in their homes. So that was, I think, one of the biggest adjustments I had to make. I think I suddenly realized after 6 months I was at work. I talked with the colleagues all the time, but I hadn't had no social interaction except visiting museums and what you do when you visit the country. But the funny thing about living in a country is it didn't take very long. I became like the Norwegians, and my culture, although I'm French Canadian and my father is very proud of the French roots and such, and my mother of the Irish roots, I am much more Norwegian today after 40 years here than I am Canadian. But the way I live and what I eat and how I talk to people, and even my French has a Norwegian accent now. Is when you live enough years, you get transformed, and it's. I was surprised, but that's a fact of life. So this cultural adaptation, which I find it's very nice because it opens your views of what happens. I think that's the most difficult to do.
Right. Well, I can speak to that. Before I moved to the States, there was one language that I could speak very well. Now I have none. So like talking about like your French, it's just like that is my Turkish, Suzanne. Like my Turkish was really good before I moved here, and it's embarrassing to say it's more difficult for me to talk and speak in Turkish right now. So I can relate to that. So we do have. I just wanted to remind our listeners or the audience that you can ask questions directly to Suzanne if you put it on the chat, and then I will direct the questions. We do have one question. It's, dear Suzanne and dear Menzer, what do you think about how we are doing as a profession in selecting women keynote speakers at our geotech conferences worldwide? I will let you take that on, Suzanne.
You know, I've thought about that because Menzer had asked me, how do you feel about being the first Terzaghi lecturer who's a woman? Well,
I'm going to ask that question, Suzanne.
but it has relation to this answer.
Yeah.
Honestly, when I was asked in 2000 to give the Terzaghi lecture, and when I gave it a year later, the thought never crossed my mind that I was the first woman. So that was not the important thing for me. But okay, but this is 20 years ago, and I think it's time to have another one, just so that it be said. But I fully understand. I am on the ASCE grant committee, and I see so many fabulous CVs of people who have done so much and do so well. It's tough competition. And, you know, for those top prizes, I think it's very important to realize that it has to be a fair competition, and there are as many men as there are women who are deserving. And there's probably more men because women are a bit younger in the profession, so they're still building up their CVs. So these are for the big lecture. But the question is about having more female keynote speakers at the Geotechnical Conference worldwide. I think there's really an honest effort being done today. I sit on many committees, and we always discuss, yes, okay, so we have 4 keynotes. Is it possible to have 2 and 2? Or is it possible to have one from this country and one from this country and such? But the competition is tough. The men are as ambitious as the women. They also want to be keynote lecturers, and there are many women deserving, but there are many men deserving. And I accept that the organizers have to make a choice, and then they make a choice which they think is best. I have seen a couple, at least one recently, where they chose a keynote to be a young woman it was a competition of 5 person. There were 4 men and 1 woman. And the woman was chosen because they said, okay, they're all good, let's choose the woman. So I had no say in that. But it was not that some of the men were better lecturers than her because of a bit more experience. They were maybe between 3 and 5 years older. So I find such attitude does a disservice to the woman. So I think we have to be fair. We want to see more women, but we have to do it in a way that the woman has to be proven that she can give this keynote lecture. She has to have the CV and the given lectures before. She has to have gone to the steps of giving lectures, from just general session, then maybe being a panel leader, and then being the keynote. But what I think, Nejan, I find that there are many, many more women being keynote lecturers today than there were 10 years ago. So I think we're moving in the right direction. But you know, it's just like everything else. It's a tough competition. And many men deserve to be keynotes too.
And I totally agree with your point, Suzanne. And, you know, I was part of the organizing committee for the 2020 Geo Congress. That we luckily did it in February, otherwise it would have never happened if it was March spring. It is for the award lectures. It is because geotechnical engineering is an experience-driven field, and because there hasn't been as many women previously involved, like for as long time as like that we have male candidates, it's very difficult to identify those keynote lecturers because they are basically driven by the awards that are being received, and then the awards are driven by the things that Suzanne is explaining. Maybe not for the keynotes, but at least for the conferences, we do make the genuine effort for having the equal representation for whether it is the session chair roles, or if it is other types of talks that are given as a part of the, for the Geo-Institute, we have geopits and anything that is not necessarily directly related to the award lectures. But I totally agree with you, Suzanne. I don't think any person should be just selected because of the gender. They need to be proven, because otherwise, I do agree that it makes disservice to all of us. So
sometimes I'm sorry for the men who miss out. Because
right. So I wanted to talk to you about a little bit more about, like, how it is within the practitioner and how in academia. So because you have the experience in both sides. So when we talk about inclusion and diversity, do you see major differences within the academic environment and the practitioner, whether it is through the gender diversity or it is more as it relates to the cultural, generational diversity? Probably the academics have a more generational diversity that we might not see in practice.
I believe that it's probably tougher in the academic environment for in experiencing diversity challenges, let's call them, than it is in practice. Because the most difficult decision in my career I had to do was to leave academia to go to practice. NGI is a private organization. We practice, we do research, but more consulting. But the academic environment is highly competitive. It does not have this. I feel that. Let's put it this other way: the environment in practice is more nurturing into people being equal and people learning from each other. And one aspect of diversity I'm concerned about is not everybody is equal in terms of talent. You have the superstars, they always do well, and you have the very good people, and then you have the average people. And my theory is if you mentor the average people, they will become better and they will be doing the job better. And I think there's more of that in practice because you're completely dependent on having average people. You cannot have only superstars. Whereas the environment in the academia tends to idolize the superstars. I'm sorry I say that, but I don't want to say it's wrong, but there it's very much how much you publish and how much money you bring in and how many lectures, keynote lectures you will give, and all these name lectures and such. So I think it's a much more difficult environment to pierce as being a superstar for a woman, for a black person, for somebody of mixed background or an immigrant in the academia than it is in practice. Because I think in practice we're a bit more equal. And people work more isolated in academia, whereas in practice you work in projects, and it's not always the same people. But if you want to be your project successful, it's the number of hours you use. So you have to use the people in the best way possible so that you keep within budget. So I think maybe academia has something to learn from practice. Not usually it's the other way around, but on that aspect.
Yeah. That's wonderful. So this is out of my own curiosity. You mentioned you switched from the academia and to practice. How did you make that decision, Suzanne? Like, what was like the trigger? And it is not just like, changing from academia to practitioner, like being a practitioner, but also moving from one continent to another. So I'm curious if you want to
but
share.
the continent, being Canadian from the north, moving to Norway, which is much warmer than northern Canada, was just like coming to the summer season. So that culture there, that culture shock was not there, except for the social aspect. It was not. Living in Norway is like living in Canada, really, in northern Canada. Okay, but okay, I truly. If those of you who heard me lecture, I truly enjoy lecture. I love to talk and to try to make a difficult problem easy to understand, and sometimes I feel I connect with the people. So teaching is something I like very much. So, but it's in geotechnical engineering. It used to be said that NGI was the finishing school of soil mechanics. That's what Ralph Peck said. So it was the ambition of people of my generation to have a postdoc at NGI. So when I finally applied and got accepted, it's written in the NGI journal. There's a picture of me when I was 20 something or 30. And then it says, she will be here 1 year. So I came there with just 1 year. I rented my apartment to the professor who was replacing me at MIT. So everything was, I was to come back. But something happened with NGI. I was perfectly happy in academia at MIT. But at NGI, they had a fabulous lab, whereas, most universities have difficulty funding a lab, so you don't have any technical assistants or such. And there they had a lab with 25 people, so I could just ask for the lab test and then it would be done. And then we worked in teams in projects, so there were projects with 2 people, there were projects with 5 or 10 people, and everybody had tasks. And in the academia, I was working much more isolated. I had lots of friends, and we were all teaching and had research projects, but there were not too many common research projects. With students, yes, but not with other professors. And so I discovered that I really enjoyed working in teams, and I found out that I felt that I was being much more creative with a team of people around me than working alone in my office, doing research alone. And so I decided to give it a try for second year. And then I was offered a job, and then it was really difficult. In those days when you had a sabbatical, you couldn't just quit. So I had to go back to MIT to give my courses for 3 years. And then, but it's probably, people say you should plan your career. Well, my career was absolutely not planned. It was a lot of coincidences. And when I decided to stay at NGI, I was perfectly happy to work on project for the rest of my life. But suddenly, when I was 42 years old, the director decided to stop, to go and become a professor of all things. And I said, oh, maybe I should apply. I like to run teams, and I applied and I got the job. I mean, it was not planned.
Well, I can relate to the coincidences part. Of course, my career is like this compared to yours, but like coincidences did play a significant role in my career too, starting with me going to Texas for my PhD, which turned out to be the best thing that I've ever done to this day. I did really enjoy my years in PhD. So shout out to Ellen. But
maybe that is one of the secrets of having a good career, is that, okay, when the opportunity comes, you seize the opportunity, and then you never regret it. You just make the best out of it. Nothing is completely perfect, although I feel most of it has been. But it's not start thinking, oh, if I had stayed there, maybe I would have been this and this. That doesn't help. It's trying to make the most of what you have. So
Yeah,
maybe
I totally agree. So it is, I always say that it's much better to have, say like, oh, well, rather than, oh, what if I've done this? So like, if I feel like I'm going to say, what if, I'll just like go with it. So I don't know. It turned out to be okay so far. I will let you know in 10 years, Suzanne. So the next question is, you talked about you love like working with the teams, and actually that is like one of the main reasons that really pushed you to stay at NGI. So when you're forming teams or when you're directing teams, how do you ensure that it is inclusive, that everybody's voice or ideas are being heard? Or like, is there any particular thing that you do, or have you paid attention to it?
it's again, it's a culture thing. I mean, 30 years ago, I never thought of checking whether I have a woman in the team, or having a foreigner from Asia in the team, or having different cultures. But today, I feel it comes automatically. If we are in the meeting room with only men, somebody makes a remark about it. So, so, but so I think that the issue of diversity has become such a common thought that it comes automatically in discussion. I was evaluating university one day. It was a Canadian university, and they had asked me, please tell me the aspect of diversity, and how did the university treat gay people? And I said, well, nobody told me they were gay, so I don't know. But I realized that at NGI, we got an employee who was openly gay, and it simply didn't make any difference because everybody accepted that. And he was different. He wore makeup and things like that. But it's I think that type of acceptance is more challenge than acceptance of gender today, because I mean, every single proposal, every single project we have, it's kind of automatic. How many women do we have? How many foreigners do we have? So
Right. So building up on that, what do you see as the biggest challenge in our industry in advancing inclusion and diversity as we move forward, whether it is in civil engineering or geotechnical engineering? Or like, are there any particular areas that you see missing that needs to be addressed? In a more global sense, of course.
I now maybe I'm going to get in trouble here. Some people don't agree, but I see one thing. I see the disadvantaged women. I have my greatest admiration for women who manage a family and a career, especially when they get past a certain age and then they become leaders, or they become scientific advisor and such. But I see, though, I have to, I mean, as I was a manager of people, and then I'm a project manager, in Norway we have long periods of leave when you have children, and I see that disadvantages women, because if you have 2 or 3 children, you're gone from work for about 2 or 3 years, because depending how you decide take your leave and such. And then compared to the men, then they end up having 2 or 3 years less experience. And I find that too bad. But I don't know what the solution to it is. They're working very hard in Norway in trying to make equal leave, men and women, but that's not really working. And it's different in different countries, but still, I don't know if there could be a way that a woman or a man, where they're on leave, because we need them to have children. That's obvious. That's the first thing that has to be done. can keep up so that there's not a difference in the level of experience, because that has a tendency to disadvantage women. In Norway too, it's much more the women who stays at home than the man. So I see that as a challenge, and I don't know if maybe the industry could find a smart way to circumvent that aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was raised in the engineering world in 1970 and the 80s, I mean, I find that the civil engineering profession has come so far compared to before that I think they've done very well. And again, I don't belong to that group of strong women who say, oh, we are discriminated against. I don't think that's correct. There is the aspect that I mentioned, that the diversity is you also have to bring, let's say, the more average engineer to by mentoring him to a level that he's comfortable into doing more difficult tasks gradually. I think that's more an aspect that we should work on in terms of diversity. Diversity is also difference in people. It's not just gender and color or skin and such.
Yeah, there are so many layers to the diversity that might not be visible to the eye, and like some of those that we sometimes miss. Well, one thing that I'm going to ask is visible to the eye. It says the generational diversity. So different generations have different expectations from like the work they do, that different things motivate them. They want to work in different ways depending on like where, how and where they were raised, or like not where, but like which era that they were raised. So have you experienced that different expectations from the different generations that you worked with, and like how we can maybe within our profession, which is very heavily experience based, which means that one generation dictates because they are the leaders within the profession, and maybe the other generations do not need to get to say or really influence the change within the profession. How do you see that, Suzanne, or like have you experienced it within your career?
Okay, early in my career, I was maybe a curiosity because there were not many women, and I was very interested and I was active and such. And I think I've been given many chances because men of a certain age, wanted to see how it would go. So that it was an aspect, and in fact, it was reverse discrimination. I got more chances because I was a woman. But I think today, as I see the younger people, and also the people of a certain age who have also evolved, and they would not find a woman starting in engineering as being a curiosity. I think that attitude has changed a lot. And then I think every good civil engineering starting is given the same chance. And that naturally, we have both. We have, as I mentioned, we have men and women who do it above expectation, and then we have some that do below expectation. But that's the same amount, same number of people, both genders or race or whatever. I have worked a lot in India. I was there several months a year, over 10, 15 years. And there you see a difference between the station of women, especially depending on the caste and such. So it has a lot to do with the culture you are raised with. And I think we're talking about Canada, USA, and Norway, we have come very far.
Yeah. So one of the audience questions indicate that research by NSF, National Science Foundation, shows that women who leave engineering don't do so primarily to care for family. They found two-thirds of women move to other professions, and 78% of these gain leadership and executive positions in that other profession. Why does engineering struggle with advancing capable women to leadership?
Okay, for some
I think
reason.
you talked this a little bit about, but like if you want to elaborate on this one, Suzanne.
Yeah, but because I think there's a logical reason for it, and it has really nothing to do with engineering. It has to do, my picture disappeared. Do you still see my picture?
I see.
Okay, somehow it disappeared on my PC. It's and I have observed it at NGI and in many other organizations. Women have sets of skills which often are different than the set of skills of men. There are many women, it's not everybody, it's not the general, but many women are very systematic and are good at organizing things and excel at leading groups. And for example, project management. So I have seen many excellent geotechnical engineering. Not everybody can be a leader in NGI, so then they take careers in being head of project management or even becoming managing directors in other companies because they aspire to do something else and they want to use the skills that they have into leading people, and there are only so many geotechnical leader positions. So I don't think that's a fault to civil engineering or any other profession. It's a normal evolution of a woman wanting to do something else. Just like when I was 42, I said, oh, maybe I should try being director at NGI. Then that means I don't do as much research. I don't do all these technical projects like I used to do, but I do something else. I do personnel aspects, I do accounting and such, and then look at the future of NGI. And that was very interesting for me. I could have done the same thing in another company if I had thought of it. So I would not put that aspect of those 2/3 moving to other professions or other leading positions, or moving, for example, to leading a company, or even becoming director in a hospital as such, because that has happened. We have a woman, Sarah Springman, is rector of the entire ETH University in Switzerland. I mean, she was a fantastic experimentalist with the centrifuge work and such. But she had the talent. She decided to go for leadership like that, and then it's a loss for the technical world, but I think it's a natural evolution. And then, but to that I attach also, when I was young, the profession choice when you were going to university was being a medical doctor, being a lawyer, being an engineer. You thought along those lines. Today, there is such a choice of careers. I mean, I am amazed in my family. In the generation before me, my uncles, my father, my grandfather and such, there are, just a close family, there are 6 civil engineers. In my generation, there is 1. And those are the big families of 11 and 15 children. And in my 20 or so nephews and nieces, there are no engineers. There's so many new careers in communication, psychology, filmmaking, which we did not consider when we were young. So I understand that it's difficult to recruit for civil engineering, both men and women.
And I think I have a comment to add to that. It also is, if I speak directly for the geotechnical engineering, as a part of it, as it's experience driven, and it's raising to leadership requires maybe a little longer time based on the experience that is needed within our profession than it might in a different profession that is not as experience driven, maybe like the tech. So if you look at the tech industry and our engineering industry, you would see that then huge gap between the generation, between the leaders that you see there. I think that part of the experience driven part of our geotechnical profession has maybe something to do with that as well.
If I can add something to that.
Yeah.
Being a geotechnical engineering is difficult. you are responsible for making designs which endanger the life of people. At least we do a lot of landslides and stuff like that. And I have a girlfriend who's a dam engineer. And the dams, we have floods and things, and there's all kinds of concerns. And she chose now to go into a career which is less demanding. And I understand that too. Not everybody likes to always be on this, using your experience. You have a lot of uncertainties and you provide data or you provide a recommendation which might go wrong, because that's geotechnical engineering. It's not a very precise science. So, and I understand why she made this choice. And so she went to something where you don't have to make those decisions.
I will come back to that, but there is one more question that's from the audience that I'm going to ask. So the question is, what is your opinion about gender pay gap, and what steps organizations can take to eliminate this?
Okay, and maybe that's a question for the pay gap in the United States. I must say I am not very informed on what are the. I keep hearing about that, but I mean, having not been a manager in the United States, I don't have the fact about that. But I know that NGI has an office in the United States, and we pay equal. I mean, we have a schedule, and it goes on the year you graduate, and that. And being a woman or a man is not a factor that comes in the equation.
Thanks, Suzanne.
If it's true that there's a gap due to gender, I think don't you have personal unions, you think, that can take this up, that can at least move the waters a bit so that the problem comes up to the surface?
But I think in some pay gap analysis, the main difference, if you average with all the engineers, like, from male to from the very top, the CEO, to the lower, there are more men in the higher up positions that get higher salaries than the women in those positions. So that also leads up to the pay gap. But I know that there are studies that are done with the Structural Engineering Association based in San Francisco, that they release this pay gap analysis based on the data that they collect from the United States, that shows that there is some difference. But that's more of an HR question. So with the interest of time, I want to move into my last question, Suzanne, if that is okay. So my last question is nothing to do with inclusion and diversity directly. I want to get your opinion as we have you here. The world is transitioning. There is a huge digital transformation that is happening, and it is affecting basically every single industry. Our industry has been maybe a little bit slower into just jumping on that boat of digital transformation, automation, and such. And with that, maybe some of the skill sets that is required to be successful in this profession might be also changing. Can you talk to us a little bit about where do you see the future of geotechnical engineering or geotechnical profession going with in light of this digital transformation, and also maybe what are the skills that you think that was most useful for you to be who you are right now, or the place that you are, and what are some skills or the advice that you can give to some upcoming engineers that look up to you?
I think that my skills when in the 90s and 2000s are not relevant anymore because it has changed so much. I used to be a very precise engineer, and everything had to be correct, and lab tests and field tests and all that. Today, it has much more to do with empathy and recognizing that you have a societal role. That when I was young, I was concerned to understand how a landslide occurs and finding the numbers and the friction angles and all that. today it's talking to the public who is exposed to the landslide and finding the means to reduce the risk to landslide. So I think you mentioned digital transformation that we can come back to, but I think it's the human side realizing that our social responsibility is not just doing a good mathematical job, it's also being a good communication job into telling, explaining what you're doing and why it's meaningful for building this railway or building this airport. And then society, the people who are affected by whatever you're building, will have a say in it. So it's not always the most economical or the most, let's say, mathematically elegant solution that is the best. So it's the one, and I think people are, and this is putting in more like a geo-environmental aspect that we're doing, whereas environmental is not just pollution, it's also the environment in which you live and aesthetics and everything, and is much more important today than before. And you cannot be, especially in academia, I think, you cannot be just a number cruncher or a modeler. You have to see the consequences of what you're doing. So I think that's a set of skill. In fact, I admire how many younger engineers have that set of skills, which my generation did not have, which we had to learn. So, and then you talked about the digital revolution. Well, we have been working from home, everybody at NGI except the people working in the lab, since March. And I am so impressed. I mean, we all have our meetings and before on the web, and we have fun on the web, and we even have a wine tasting party on the web. This adaptation has happened. I mean, it just shows that we are completely adaptable. So I'm absolutely not worried about that part. I mean, even I know engineers who are above 80 years old who just carry through these electronic meetings and they learn to use Team, and then so that's part of our future. I don't think, because of the pandemic, I don't think we're going to go back to the normal way of working and we go into work every day and sit in that office. I mean, at least I don't want to do it. I'm perfectly happy working from home.
And that is so true. So I know for my company, we do have this initiative for future of work, understanding that we are not going back to the old ways and how we can revolutionize the way that we work moving future after the pandemic. Because, this actually, it adds to the inclusion and diversity in a way that this flexibility enables us to include more people, maybe, and for them to accommodate their schedules, whether it is a working mother or a working father that needs to drop off their kids to the school or needs to be home for a little while to get things done. So everybody really realize that how being agile and flexible is actually at the end very beneficial to the company. I know for Jacobs that I can speak to my company, our productivity stayed the same or increased during this time, which was a greater shock for everyone, because if you were to come and tell all these leaders within the company that everybody is going to work, and we are a 55,000 people company, everybody's going to work from home, using Teams, nobody would believe that would satisfy the productivity. But it just shows how agile we are and how adaptable we are, that more than maybe we realize.
Yeah. But there's a challenge. The companies have to find ways to keep us united, keep us part of a group, proud of our company, proud of what we're doing. So they have to arrange, after the pandemic, they have to arrange some social meeting things. But that's okay. That's just nice.
And for us, it is not like a full remote working. So we still will have the in-person meetings, and but maybe you don't have to go to the office five times a week. It is more on a distributed workplace rather than in office workplace. Anyhow, I think we're on the top of the hour, so that completed our time with you, Suzanne, and it has been a great pleasure to have you. So thank you so much for taking time to be a part of this live series and talk to us about how you see inclusion and diversity in your profession. It has been an absolute pleasure for me. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. Have a good afternoon. It's evening here.
You have good evening. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone. So wherever you are in the world. I have a few announcements to make before we close. Just like this particular live series and the previous 3 episodes or 2 episodes, this is the 3rd one, you can always go on the YouTube live channel of the GI to watch the previous live series or rewatch what we've had, what we talked with Suzanne if you missed the beginning of the series or anything. And there are a few other announcements that tomorrow Geo-Institute will be live again with the 3rd in the series of tutorials on the IDEA program for evaluating MSc walls. And tomorrow's session will be on how states can implement the evaluation protocols. Join the stream at 2 p.m. Eastern right here on the GI YouTube channel. And with that, thank you so much for your attendance and joining us today.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.